Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Eklund with Legislation Take Action, and I'm here with Lance Christenson, and he is running for office, but I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about what he's running for. Lance?
Perfect, Wendy. So good to see you.
You too.
Lance Christenson, father of five. I'm a education policy advocate, specialist. I've been doing parental rights issues for a long time, spent 17 years in the legislature. I worked at the Department of Finance on education budget issues, was part of the team that helped draft the school choice initiative last year, and also have done a couple different think tanks along the way. I taught fourth grade about 20 years ago. And so education's kind of in my blood, and I really have a passion for it, especially with a kindergartner through 12th grade of my house. I have my own K through 12 education system at home.
Yes.
My wife actually homeschools our three youngest through a public charter school online. And so she's been doing that for the last few years through the pandemic, and it's been an incredible experience. And my oldest son graduates in 2 weeks, and it's surreal how fast it all goes,
Yeah.
So the Superintendent of Public Instruction is the top education official in California. They're the executive director of the Department of Education, and they're also the ex officio for the Board of Education as a member. They sit on the Commission for Teacher Credentialing, their ed boards that we have out there, and they do a whole bunch of other stuff. And though they're not responsible for, they do receive the public school or private school affidavits in that office. And then they facilitate a lot of federal funding. They'll do some auditing and curriculum issues. And pretty much if it's in education, they're somewhere around there. And it's a huge budget for the superintendent's office. It's about $125 million this last year. So a lot going on, but they don't control everything in education because that's what we have school boards for.
Right. Well, in our legislature.
Well,
our legislature creates laws, and then the Department of Ed has to implement those laws and see how they're going to work.
And they don't do it very well very often, right? And you've experienced this. Most of the time when they go through these processes, it becomes very much a bureaucratic process that's headed up by somebody who's not connected to any real education or parents or families.
Right.
And ends up becoming a complete cluster through the whole process.
Right. I do have to say the gentleman who runs the department that oversees the private school affidavit, he is awesome.
Good. Yeah.
He is super helpful and always willing to answer questions. So I love him. So tell me why you think it's important that homeschoolers, whether they're filing the PSA themselves or they're homeschooling through a charter school, why they pay attention and vote for the right person in this position.
One name, Delane Easton. Anybody who was around years ago remembers what she did to homeschoolers and the continuous attacks on homeschoolers.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of conversations with homeschoolers over the last months, especially as we talk about school choice and how that impacts them as well. I think one of the big concerns that most homeschoolers have is they just want to be left alone, and I get it. As a homeschool family, we just want to be left alone to do our thing. Now we're homeschooled through a public charter, so that's a different dynamic than those that do it on their own. I understand the nuances. I get it.
Right.
But I also understand too that what happens in Sacramento doesn't stay in Sacramento. And one quick story. So what was it? 3 or 4 years ago when I was the chief of staff for then State Senator John Morlock, there was the bill to go and basically get rid of a lot of these homeschools, right? And I can't remember which bill number it was, but I can remember sitting in my office.
The fire marshal one, right?
Yeah. I can remember
I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was the one where they were going to allow the fire marshal to come into our homes simply based on the fact that we homeschool, no other probable cause or anything, just because we homeschool.
And the idea was that would scare a lot of people, right? And it would, create a different bureaucracy.
Right.
And I can remember walking outside my office, and again, almost 20 years in the legislature, I'd never seen as many people show up to a hearing in my entire life.
There.
And I think we might have chatted or passed each other, but I went through the hall. I walked every inch, every floor, And I was blown away. And that was, of course, before the pandemic, when they would let you
Right.
testify. And
When they let us in the building, right?
And it was the only, no, I take that back. There was one other bill another time, but it was pretty much the only time I had seen parents shut a bill down in committee. That
Well,
just
yeah, they wouldn't
happen.
even vote on it. No one would even make the motion to bring it to a vote.
That never, ever, ever happens. And so I've been affiliated with the homeschool community for a long time. And I've spoken at a lot of homeschool events over 20 years. Been hugely supportive. But I think a lot of those families just feel like, well, we're not part of the public school system, so why should we care?
Right.
You should care because the public school system actually doesn't like you.
Right.
They just don't. And it's a fact of the matter. And so
and they've actively started coming after us at this point. Exactly. At least they used to just kind of be like, oh, we don't like them and leave them over there. But over the last 5 years, they've started coming after us.
Right? Well, and all you have to do is look at the numbers of last year or 2 years where we're at 271,000 kids have left the system. Now, some of those are in homeschool, some are in private school, some have left the state entirely. Right. But when they see numbers hemorrhaging like that, they can't stand it. I was on KBC this afternoon talking to John Phillips, and he said, LAUSD is hemorrhaging.
Right.
What's going on? Well, it's very obvious. The schooling is terrible. These kids got a rough ride during the pandemic. They haven't been able to pick up where they left off. Right. Literacy in California, from most of our students, is at 50th in the nation.
Right.
Not 47th, not 50th, 49th, it's 50th, right, which should give us great concern. And that's not the homeschoolers that are producing that. The homeschool families are doing an incredible job. My wife and I were talking about this last night, where our son was taking his reading assessment this year. And just like, he's in 4th grade, and again, he just loves to read, but he's not wasting a lot of time going back and forth between school and, doing a lot of filler work. He's reading books, he's getting engaged, he's doing fun things. And we still do a lot of active, activities and events and forums, and they still go to different kinds of classes and groups. It's all there. And so they don't understand that, they being the bureaucracy, the school bureaucracy. And in as much as they can come and try to take that away, that's why superintendent is important. And the current superintendent is a wholly owned subsidiary of the California Teachers Association.
Yep.
And so again, I think every homeschool family out there should be supporting me, because I understand I'm actually where you are right now.
Right.
I want the government as far away from you as possible. I want you to continue to have your autonomy, but you can't have it if you have somebody in the office that is actively coming after you. And just 3 weeks ago, I'm trying to remember, the current superintendent, the incumbent, announced a plan to go find out where all these kids are going. Well, what do you think he's going to find? It's the same thing he found when he decided back in 2019 to go after all the charter schools. And then we had this whole flood of legislation. And I know that in California, we are protected by some pretty robust Supreme Court rulings and protections. I get all that. But as with that previous bill, the legislature is very creative. They are way more creative than Hollywood.
Right.
And they will find a way to make homeschool families' lives more miserable. I want to do everything I can to prevent that.
Well, it also cracks, the thing that always gets me is that they complain that they don't know where our kids are. They don't know what our kids are doing when they're homeschooled. But then we've created this environment in our charter schools where so many of the kids are now able to have their education through a public charter school. Now you know where our kids are. Now you know how our kids are doing. And yet you're trying to destroy that as well. So if you it doesn't even make sense to me. Then because we're not all going to be in just the normal up the street public school. I tried that with my kids, and my child had a stomach ulcer by the end of kindergarten. It doesn't work for every child. So give us options and support those options. Don't constantly be attacking those options. Yeah.
Wendy Eklund for Superintendent of Public Instruction.
No, thank you. I will leave that to you.
I'm with you. I just like most parents, I just want the best for my kids.
Right.
And I don't honestly, as long as you're educating kids the way you see fit, then God bless you. I have zero desire to tell people how to educate their kids. I think there's a certain amount of core competencies that every kid should have.
Right.
But I've yet to meet a good parent who doesn't really want the best for the kids.
Doesn't
There
want
are
the best
terrible
for their
parents
kids.
out there. And again, I acknowledge this.
Right. But that's a completely separate issue. Like
But
that's where
that's the
that one
exception
bill
to the
came
rule.
from, was a child
Yes.
abuse case. And child abuse is separate from homeschooling or how we educate our
Correct.
children.
Correct. And
Totally separate.
we make those distinctions in a lot of other laws, right?
Right.
And so I feel the same way. It's almost like if you want to make sure that kids are being taken care of, whatever, then I think there are other ways to approach that have nothing to do with homeschool
Right.
or with education. And frankly, I don't know where the government has a leg to stand after spending 2 years locking kids out of the school where
Right.
there were legitimate child abuse things and issues at home. Legitimate. And I taught
Right.
4th grade in inner city school in Denver, Colorado. I know what it's like to have a kid show up who's not bathed in weeks, who's not had a healthy, meal in days, who probably didn't sleep more than a couple hours the night before because
Right.
his mom is strung out on cocaine.
Right.
I lived that life. I understand what
Yeah.
that looks like. That's not the rule. That's the exception. And in as much as we can help those kids, there are different ways to do that, but it has nothing to do with homeschool.
Right. Right. Well, I think that you gave us a lot of reasons why we should pay attention to this office and vote for Lance. Is there anything else you think that our community should know?
Yeah, I think if the homeschool community really wants to make a difference in this race, here's a secret that not a lot of people know. It's the only nonpartisan race in
Right.
the statewide, meaning that the governor's race, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, the others, they're all partisan races, meaning that it's the top 2 that go from the June election on
Right.
the 7th to the general election on November 8th. This one is different because if one candidate gets 50% plus 1 vote, a simple majority, the race is over in June.
Oh, wow. I had no idea that.
No,
teaching me
a lot of
something,
people
Lance.
don't. So here's the deal. I have seen what happens when homeschoolers get excited and get active. When they go and they knock on their neighbors' doors, they talk to their friends, their community. If we can unite behind one candidate, this guy, and we can make sure that everybody gets out and votes for me,
Right.
then this will be done. And it won't be millions and tens of millions of dollars. $50 million were spent in 2018 for
Right.
that superintendent's race, which came down to the final, less than 2%. And the charter school advocate, who's a great guy, I met him last week, we had a great conversation. He lost by a small amount of votes.
Right.
But that was because a lot of people didn't feel like they had an alternative. I'm the alternative.
Right.
You don't get any further between me and the incumbent in anywhere on the ticket. And
Right.
so I really firmly believe that if there are enough voters that go out, that are concerned parents, that are people that really want to make sure that our public education system works and works well, and that our private and homeschool situations do what they need to do and are left alone, then that's what they should do. My focus will be on making sure that every kid gets a high quality public education if they desire, and if they don't desire that, to make sure that they are given the tools and the room and the autonomy to make their own education. So please, lancechristenson.com, go support, donate, volunteer. There's plenty of opportunities. And I love homeschool families because I am one.
Right.
I get it. So
but that's actually something I was going to point out. I've known Lance for a while now, and he wants to support what's best for each child. So not just homeschooling, not just private homeschooling, not just charter schooling, but every child in our state deserves a good education.
Yeah, I have 5 kids.
Looks like for them. Right.
5 kids, they're all different.
Right.
They are not like each other at all. And so, the one kid that might struggle in reading, or might have a speech impediment, or might be socially awkward, or maybe does really good in math, but not in other areas.
Right.
I think there are ways we can deal with this stuff. And frankly, I'm just blown away. I mean, watching you, Wendy, you're impressive. Because whenever I want to have somebody help me work through this process, I just think, okay, what would these really good and thoughtful homeschool parents do? And you go on the resources that are out there like crazy.
Right.
I am amazed and blown away by the resourcefulness of most homeschool families. And it doesn't take much except for a person who cares.
Yeah.
And so sending our kids off to some random bureaucrat every August, just because that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
To me, the system, we used to put these kids, or we still do. We put them on a conveyor belt and send them down to the public education warehouse and hope that they come out all right on the other side.
Right.
I don't know. It's the 21st century.
Yes.
And maybe it's time to go back to the basics. Our country did amazing things when kids were homeschooled,
Right.
which was pretty much everybody at the time. And I think we can do it again. And there's so much information on the web.
Yeah.
There's so many great resources out there, and people that want to do the mini schools or pods or
Right.
group homeschools for their churches or different civic groups. I think the opportunities are endless. Right now, the current superintendent and the education bureaucracy, which is led by the teachers union, doesn't want that because they want to keep their jobs, not educate students.
Yeah, but they're pushing kids out of their schools. So if you have no children left, are we really going to continue funding empty classrooms like we did during COVID?
Well, that's what they're doing right now. I mean, if you
Right.
look at some of these places, like Sac City Unified just had that big strike a couple weeks ago. Well, we find out that they now have to go back to school so they can get the statutorily required amount of time in the classroom.
Right.
When parents have already scheduled vacations and different plans or jobs. How do you do that? I mean, like, how do you ruin some people's lives like that? And I know a lot of homeschool families that they can get through a lot of material, but then what do they do through the summer? So they've already set a pattern, right?
Right.
Education's not a late August through late May or June. It's a year-round thing.
Yes. Right.
Hey, have you read your book today? Did you write a little, note? Did you go out and do, some studies? Like, my wife is constantly teach our kids, whether or not she has to, based upon some sort of curriculum.
Well, it also becomes your way of life. Like, you don't even necessarily think that you're teaching anymore. Like, we used to always joke that we never were home during the school year because that's when we would go to museums and we would go to all these places. We would take road trips when everyone else was in school. And then in the summer, we would spend the whole summer working through the math curriculum. Yeah. And we wouldn't necessarily do it all school year. We would just do some of it. And so you can just accommodate for what you want to do. But now with so many people homeschooling, everything's crowded all the time. So,
well, it's true. But I also think that we're going to see a lot of changes in the way that we fundamentally approach education.
Right.
And to have somebody who understands that at the top, who can push back against a lot of the tendencies to just keep doing the things we've always been doing it, right? That doesn't work, that's broken. Tony Thurman, the current superintendent in the San Francisco Chronicle, they endorsed him last week, which is a surprise to me. I know everybody's really surprised. But they said in there, they listed all of the reasons he's failed his kids. And at the very end, they said, well, the governor was making all these negotiations and yet you weren't in the room. He goes, yeah, I know. I tried to get in the room, but I couldn't. But he said, we've got to fix this school to prison pipeline. He admits there is a problem here.
Right. Right.
And so what are we doing for these kids in the inner cities? What are we doing for these kids in rural areas? Are we really taking care of them and their needs? I don't think so.
No. Yeah. And we need to take care of everybody. I agree with you. Right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I feel bad I took so much of your time, but I appreciate you being willing to share and talk to our families and let them know who you are and all the reasons that they should vote for you.
I appreciate it, Wendy. You're amazing. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Lance. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.